And we are live. K. Lou, for the love of the game, acquire and operate micro SaaS. Were you ever a Talib Kweli fan in Most Def?
Not that much. More most def. Tyler was in.
What's that?
Oh, you just froze it for a second. I was saying more of a most def. Talib was kind of definitely more most def.
Okay, well, it's like, recording live from somewhere. Da-da-da, it's like,
Ah,
da-da-da-da, mercy. Da-da-da-da,
yep.
pizza,
Get
beat.
some Black Star going.
Da-da-da-da. She said, oh, God, you rolling hip hop. No, I guess it was DJ High Tech. Oh, man. That's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah. That's like, dude, Black. I don't even think most people even know about Black Star today. Like, you took it way back.
It's throwback. That's for me was middle school days, honestly. All right. Well, here we are, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us. Today, in terms of just quick substance, it's going to be a little bit of a departure. So we're, as we preach, we're iterating, getting better. Ideally, simplicity over time. That's my new favorite marker for rate of improvement. And so traditionally, we had kind of a monthly issue, 4 parts. And we would blend in a portfolio performance wrap, which was kind of a look at our OKRs, how do we execute, what were the key learning lessons, stuff like that we would then pull forward. We're changing now. I guess there's some different updates that are kind of structural to our operating model and some of the other good stuff that we've got going on, but it all relates because it impacts what we're going to be talking about today. But simply put, we're turning these portfolio performance and strategy discussions into their own thing. They're independent of the typical programming, the usual 4-part monthly issues. And obviously, that's motivated because by the fact that they're going to be beastly. There should be a lot of content. And
Yep.
and we wanted to fit our new operating cadence, which we're going to be shifting to quarters for the most part. We're still going to do sprints for content and product, obviously. But everything else is going to be on a quarterly basis. So here we are. Today, we're going to be jamming just in terms of a table of contents, an agenda, if you will. 2 big parts to the program. We've got the reflection and diagnosis, which is going to be a look back. And we're not going to spend, we usually spend more time, honestly, retrospectively than we will today. But we're just going to basically take a quick look by the numbers and go through our various kind of manifestations of a scorecard. And then we'll get into the meat, which is going to be some strategic planning. And I think probably a big prompt or motivator for the I guess, real long-term view. And what do I mean with strategic planning? We're going to do a quick SWOT analysis on the state of our business. And then we're going to talk about reverse engineering success. So taking kind of that Y3 view, that Y2 view, and that backing into it, right? So like, where do we want to be in
Yeah.
3 years? And we have a 3-year investment timeline as kind of our base case time horizon. If we want to be there in 3 years, where do we need to be in 2? Where do we need to be at the end of year 1? And then to pull that all the way back to the hell should we rock on this quarter? So we'll jam on that. And again, the big, I guess, catalyst for us is that we just hit our 6-month marker as owner and operator of our portfolio company. So, oh, there we
It's been a
are.
wild ride, baby. It's been a wild ride.
And that's the agenda. Shit. Anything to add, Kalu?
No, I think you summed it up pretty well. I'm excited to get into it.
Okay, that's a win. All right, so what are we looking at? So the headline here is MRR and active subscribers. So this is like if we're thinking about by the numbers, this is as by the numbers as it gets. So we're going to start MRR, active subscribers, then we'll look at core performance metrics, and then we'll step back into like an actual weekly scorecard. So, again, kind of a longer forward view back into the stuff that we look like on a weekly basis. So MRR. I mean, generally speaking, what's kind of weird is, there's a distinction between trailing 12-month revenue, and we were at 22 trailing 12-month revenue was 230K. So if you back into that from an MRR perspective, because it's all pure SaaS recurring revenue, that's about 19K MRR. But some of the subscriptions were prepaid. It's not necessarily the structure of like an annual plan. It was like, hey, I want to buy 12 months at a discount, or you buy 6 months, you get a discount, 12 months, you get a discount, 4 months or more, you get an even steeper discount. So that throws our numbers off a little bit in terms of systems. We also had to transition the business to Stripe. So needless to say, and as we get into this, when you think about our growth trajectory, in our reality, we think of it as where we started was 19K MRR, but we had a lot of unearned income in the form of subscriptions that had already been prepaid but hadn't been supported. This is all nuance that's very important as an acquirer. But I don't want to dive too deep into it right now. I just kind of want to call that out because there'll be a little discrepancy between how we think about MRR and what you see on the dashboard. But all things considered, that trend line on MRR is not bad, my friend. I mean, we look at, right, starting point was 14.9K in May. We're sitting at, north of $1,000 in cumulative MRR growth in October. And of
Yep.
course, that's kind of a forward forecast number. We're only a third through October. And then there's been some choppy growth in net new MRR. And net new MRR, the calculus is pretty straightforward. It's additions. For us, we don't really have much expansion revenue. Like, it's very rare that somebody, we're not cross-selling. It's very rare that folks upgrade. We're going to solve for that, as we'll discuss here, in terms of a new pricing and monetization strategy. But net MRR was a little choppy. But I look at this and I'm like, cool. Our growth rate is right where about on a monthly basis is right about where it needs to be. The SaaS quick ratio is not great, but that's okay. We're not optimizing for that. ARPU is where it's been. Lifetime value is where it's been. Active customers are trending in the right direction. All positive. I mean, to me, there's no red flags, but there's no like, holy shit, knock you out of your seat stuff
Yeah, for
either.
the most part, all the signals are up and to the right, which is exactly what you want to see. And then for the areas that are choppy, I think on the back end, we're going to definitely get into our plans to how we plan to address that.
Cool. Cool, cool, cool. Let me bounce over here then. So now we'll zoom back and let's look at, this is a more kind of tactical kind of core metrics scorecard, right? So if you look at like the dollars and cents, active subscribers, MRR, that is truly like the most lagging indicator that exists, right? So for us now, we want to think about, all right, what do we need to do? Or generally, how are we pacing against the metrics that impact those things? So before we
Hmm.
weren't paying as much attention to new visitor sessions, and I think one of the big learning lessons is regretfully, we fixated on down funnel. And I think unless you're south of like a 10% trial to paid conversion rate, I think you kind of just leave trial to paid. Like, I'm not sure you mess with onboarding. I think you just try to drive really quality traffic to the top of the funnel and see what happens. And worst case is you burn bridges with people that would have been good users or with, accounts
Hmm.
that would have been good. But best case, you could grow some revenue, you acquire some users, and you get a shitload more surface area inside of the product to actually measure behavior and get smarter about everything you're doing. And we've spoken about this kind of ad nauseum. So where we're at now, you'll see achieved onboarding, which was totally hypothetical and not even structured as an experiment or a hypothesis, just kind of a miss generally. I think we rushed to get there because we thought it would drive results, and that was misguided. So we've got new visitor sessions. And what do you see there, Kev?
So the new visitor sessions it's kind of trending down a bit, but that says there's some more work to pretty much do on top of the funnel to drive better quality traffic. And a lot of that comes with, having a bit of visibility into how the product is being used today. How can we go back out and kind of bring people in top of funnel that would be quality?
Totally. We've got March, disregard that. That's when we were getting GA4 analytics dialed in, and that's when we took ownership of the business. So there was some weird instrumentation there, but some
Hmm.
interesting spikes, right? I mean, I think what we've proven is we can pull a lever, like we did the webinar. We've done
Yep.
some UGC oriented activities that have shown nice spikes in new visitor sessions. And when we get into our weekly scorecard, you'll see how we kind of decompose that because we've been really fixated on getting our always on owned channels going, which is blog content, and then
Hmm.
getting more leverage from that content via distribution to social. And we're starting to see results there. But generally speaking, new visitor sessions pop in. Trial signups year over year, like we had a slow start, relatively speaking, in January, February, and March. But then, man, I think we've caught up and then some. So I'm not very concerned at all about overcoming the delta. I think the main thing for me was quality. And
Right.
something that I do in kind of like a CEO playbook, or if you want to think about I don't know, CEO like checklist. I used to joke about a CRO checklist. Like on the CEO checklist, 100% is market facing time, right? So like talk to customers, talk to users, et cetera. Something else that I do is I just comb through our trial user signups on a regular basis and just look at them,
Mm.
look at their websites, look at their email addresses. Are these dog shit people or is this legit? And I can definitely tell this is very subjective. We could make it more quantified, but I think that great uptick in the quality of the trial users that we're getting, and we can lean into that in terms of like the actual sources. And we're starting to see
Hmm.
our ambassadors refer some solid folks to us. So, again, I think it's a quality over quantity game in almost any game you're playing, and I think we're trending in
Yep.
the right direction there.
Yeah, for the most part, it's steady state, but definitely some work to do to light that channel up.
Yeah, 100%. A lot. Yeah, I think I'm not sure we've cracked the code with incentives. Enablement's kind of always a moving animal. I think you've said a lot of stuff too, where it's like splitting the atom. Well, we always try to split the atom, right? Where it's like getting to the thing behind the thing behind the thing. And ideally, if you get to the
Right.
root, then that's where you find leverage, and away we go. It's like, hey, what about like an ambassador contest? It's like, yeah, let's incentivize leads. And it's like, well, that's kind of weird and like synthetic. Why don't we incentivize content? Like
Exactly.
scream about this thing from every
It's
mouthpiece that you have, and what will
more
happen, Kevin?
organic. It's way more organic. Guess
The
what?
leads will come.
The quality leads, the quality people who can grow our lifetime value in terms of active usership, those people will be more attractive or attracted to our ambassadors that are just putting out organic content. So, look, an ambassador will be get the kind of quality ambassador that we would want in the future. So, let's do it. Let's light it up.
Totally. And that's always been such a weird thing because it's so like context related,
Yeah.
right? It's like you mainly want your ambassadors to be equipped to speak your name and speak about it correctly and do it in the things that they already have established, but also kind of answer the question correctly when somebody asks them. Because
Yeah.
outside of that, it's like, hey, everyone should use this and it's great, and I'm making 20% by the way, and that stuff always falls flat, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And then you just end up
It's
sounding like another talking head that's selling another product. Like, no one wants that.
It's just pitching some shit. Yeah, totally, totally, same page. Cool. Anyway, churn is looking kind of steady state too. And I was going to ask you, trial to like, it's still a little funky with DataBox. That's what we use for our scorecards, which is a great tool. You can pipe in any kind of data. But this seemed to be, oh, actually, so this should be year to date. Actually, I resolved this. So this is now year to date. Originally, I think it was kind of calculating or it was as like a year to date average. So it would
Hmm.
basically take performance and then divide it by the time period. Now it's kind of like an aggregate over time, which I like for trial to paid and for churn. So we're sitting at 1.3%. Last month obviously was awesome. We had it's factoring for last 30 days, but I guess steady state for us, like, to churn sub 10% of your entire user base in 3 quarters, pretty radical. And then we've started to add support tickets to the surface area. I just dropped these in. So
Hmm.
we've got created tickets here, and again, that's trending in a very positive direction. And I guess this is kind of a barbaric proxy, but it's like, yo, how's the product delivering? How is our users navigating the product? It's like, I don't know. Are there more or less support tickets? Support tickets is usually pretty crude, but useful proxy for people navigating stuff.
Yes.
Good there?
100%. 100%. Yep.
All right, weekly scorecard. This has gotten a lot sexier. I mean, I think right now it's like, hey, let's stop fixating on down funnel. Let's go hard as we can at top of funnel. Let's really now we have our always on channels stood up and buzzing. We've got webinars buzzing and kind of testing webinars and ambassadors. Our first kind of, I guess, and I think ambassador we're going to stick with and that's mostly qualitative feedback. But there's such a word of mouth buzz around this SaaS that I think we got to keep ambassador going and just pray to the SaaS gods. It's like, yo, we're gonna beat this drum and just reward us eventually, please. Like, we believe,
Yep.
which is not a ton of rigor or scientific method, but I guess we'll apply that to everything else, and hopefully we'll meet somewhere
You
in the
know
middle.
what? There's still some qualitative value there because when you look at other competitors in the industry, whether they're vertical or horizontal to our portfolio company, they're not spending a lot of time with their users. They're leaning more on a product-led growth strategy, whereas we are actually getting in with our ambassadors. We're looking at what trial sign-up people are doing. We're truly trying to do the primary research to understand how to better engage them. So, hey. Pray to the SaaS gods. It's gonna work out.
Well, and so far I'm feeling pretty good about results. So I mean, I think you can see
Yeah.
spikes here that are again kind of on demand, that are content driven, that are UGC.
Yep.
I mean, general traffic, and there's some seasonality at play in our category as well. So, which for us, we should start to see kind of a natural spike up.
Mm-hmm.
But we were shooting. I mean, trial signups by source, Google and search engines up 550% over the last 30 days. Others up 700%. I need to dig into what other is. And again, are these trial signups quality, right? That's the main thing. But Pixify
Mm-hmm.
ambassador leads are up 5x. So, I mean, let's go,
That's good.
right? I mean,
That's
this is
good.
all good shit. Like, these aren't like knock you out of your seat numbers again, but we're just starting to see cause and effect here, and that's what it's all about. Cool. And then we just started a new month, so we're, obviously we should be about almost half, I guess. I don't know, a little more than a fourth through both these, which is new visitor sessions and trial signups, and I'm liking it both. Our funnel is still just like but I mean, I don't know. We're doing 2% conversions from our website to trial signups, not terrible. Base rate comps for sub 25K MRR SaaS businesses is like 3-4%. And a lot of that depends on your sales motion as well, obviously. And then
Yep.
10% new paying users. So let's go, right? I mean,
Yeah.
shit.
Look, I'll say this was a great experiment, especially with the ambassador program. Our mission was to see how fast we can light up content and get people to engage in it. And we thought maybe that'll bring a bunch of traffic top of funnel. We lit up content. Yeah, we got some engagement, but we didn't see the results we wanted top of funnel. And now with the experiments for the Pixfy ambassador, we can easily see, yes, referrals and trial signups are coming up at a 5x rate. So, hey, I think the ambassador program was a great experiment. It's showing results. Let's double down.
So, and that's impatience with actions, patience with results. Hate that one. That one bugs me.
Yep.
But it's
You
the
live, you
truth.
learn.
All right, so let's bounce back. All right, so now, yeah, so I think we touched on everything. So for strategic planning, I just wanted to show this image here quick because I think it does a great job of kind of, because SWOT analysis used to bug me so bad because it's like, is a strength the same as an opportunity? Are weaknesses threats?
Dude, this
It's
is the
kind of
bane of my
awkward.
existence. They're all kind
And
of
it,
like overlapping in a sense.
and it's like, well, actually, let's just establish kind of dimensions. So if
Hmm.
you think about external versus internal and positive versus negative,
Hmm.
this has just helped me. When somebody showed me this, it's like, okay, got it. So strengths are internal and positive. Weaknesses are internal and negative, right? And then we think about
Yep.
opportunities are external, positive. Threats are internal, or I'm sorry, external,
External.
negative, right? And you can kind of just work around the thing. So, anyway, I wanted to bounce there real quick, and then let's jump in. So, I mean, I think for strengths for us, and so I guess the context here, right? And so we're totally switching gears just to recap. So that's as much reflection and diagnosis as we're going to be spending time on for this cut. Obviously, at the end of this quarter, you should expect at least a 50-50 split. But for us, it was a much more forward-looking, let's recalibrate our goals conversation and kind of fine-tune mostly around where we wanted to be after year one and how are we pacing, and then does that change how that cascades into year two, year three, et cetera. All right, so picking it back up, strategic planning, forward looking, and we kind of start as a point of departure with a SWOT analysis. So we've got our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. I want to kind of bang through these so that we can get to this conversation about reverse engineering success, how we think about a Y3 objective, backing that into Y2, Y1, and appreciating the physics, right? The
Hmm.
reality of it. Dahlia is a big whoever the human with the best grasp on the physics, aka reality, usually wins whatever game they're playing. So it's important to think through that lens and kind of be ruthlessly trying to better understand the world around you. So strengths, user retention, still dope. Was dope when we got it. We've maintained that. We've modernized the brand and the digital presence. I think that was definitely holding the firm back before we got in, and we've seen that manifest in better quality trial conversions, and I think likelihood of traffic too. Our always on channels, blog and socials buzzing. or I guess we would just say kind of always on period. We would consider those to probably be the most usual, suspect table stakes. And
Yep.
then our user engagement, our Facebook group is super engaged, and with the monthly user newsletter, we're getting
I did want to
50%
comment.
open rates.
I wanted to
Yeah,
comment on the Facebook group. It's all positive conversations and engagement these days compared to when we first got in, and it's a great feeling.
yeah. Right. I wanted to shut that down in terms of assets.
Yep.
It's probably our smoothest, fastest link to users, right? I mean, it's real time discussion. I mean, I don't know what you do without a Facebook or any, or whatever. A God, what's the shit called? God, a Discord or a Telegram or
Gotcha, like
some
a
kind of central,
Reddit.
yeah, just something that is faster and more collective, communal than email exchange.
Yep.
But
And it's
tech stack. This is you, Kalu. I'm sorry.
yeah, with the whole system of record, like it took a lot of work getting this system humming. We had to get the product connected to the CRM. We had to stand up the support channel. We had to get the blog ripping, revamp the entire knowledge base, and then get notifications across the entire board into Slack, so we just know what's going on at any minute of the day. That was not simple, but it is all worthwhile looking
Totally.
back and just seeing things coming through. Bing, 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 bing all day. You're like, okay, yep, this user's happy, cool. New trial sign up, great. Someone just converted to paying user, great. It's all there.
Totally. And I think it's interesting too, right? I mean, or I would say it's a safe assumption that the CRM for most micro SaaS firms is probably the system of like the billing, the financial system of record, like a Stripe. It's like, hey,
Yep,
we've got our customers in Stripe, and that's their profile. And there isn't a ton of thought process around like an integrated CRM. Obviously, we come from an enterprise oriented kind of SLG background where the CRM is the most mission critical part of the whole stack. But it's like, all right,
yep,
we're going to get users over here. Oh shit, there's a difference between accounts and users. All right, we need to pipe in product usage data that's coming from the product backend, which is a DB somewhere. Oh, we're migrating support over here. We're standing up a blog. We're standing up a knowledge base. And everything sounds 30% easier than it is, or everything's said another way. Like, yeah, let me just confuse the shit out of everybody. Almost everything is at least 30% harder than you think, and it's going to cost 30% more than you think, and it's going to take 30% longer than you think.
that's the
So I think
truth.
the tech stack was a great example of that. And then Slack, I mean, people are like, oh, for folks that are unfamiliar with Slack, and I mean, I think everyone is, but I guess this is kind of a function of demographics. But to me, the true genius of Slack is the notification hub, honestly. Like, I love, async comms, that's great. Channel based, communication dialogue, that's great. I love it because I'm getting all my alerts pipe in there and I can decide when I want to look at which one. It's just so much more elegant than an inbox. And that's a function of zaps and all kinds of shit. So anyway, the tech stack is buzzing, obviously. Our documentation is buttoned up now. We've got all our product workflows documented. The weird part, and this is, it's funny, Slack just released a totally new front end for their mobile and their web apps. And all their support content is now dated. And I was like, oh God, like they're sending links to old shit. And I'm like, oh man, like just watching us, it's like the ghost of
Yep.
Christmas future. I'm like, oh God, like we're going to have to go through all this shit. This is going to be awful. But anywho, it's the nature of the beast. And then lastly, we're at our V3 scorecard. And honestly, there was a ton of iteration there. And I think really regardless of the context of our next company, that like we're going to get to that V3. And you got to assume that that's how this whole game is played. But I'm like, boom, here's the template, bang, bang, bang. We connect the data points, and it's
Yep.
a natural. It'll still evolve, right, as the tech stack evolves, because I think the visibility is a function of back end systems and integration and data
Yep.
strategy. Anyway, cool. We'll keep it moving right along. Support leadership and reputation. So I think that was the big seller risk. We've managed to get that into a much better spot. Weaknesses, and again, I'm going to rattle these off because I want to get to the good stuff. So we get weaknesses are internal and negative. You guessed it. We've got a legacy grandfathered pricing and monetization strategy. Not great. We've got a universal onboarding experience. Whether you're Kale or Kevin, you're getting thrown into the same house, same front door. Lack of success driven video content. We index hard towards very click through-y, very workflow based content. But obviously, video content is the most engaging, as much as 4x more than any kind of static stuff. So we need to get up on that. Scaling the support function is inherently challenging because it's a complex product. And that's like a perfect example of a trade-off. Complexity usually equals sticky, but hey, I went through and it's hard to implement and it's heavy to support, but it's usually pretty sticky. On the other side, simple is easy to onboard, time to value is beautiful, but there's not much keeping folks away, or keeping folks from leaving. So you got to kind of decide where you are on that line.
Right.
Moving on, dated UI and misguided UX, not great. And then we've had, maybe it's like not limited product usage viz, but like choppy. Like we had a partner
Very
that we
choppy.
worked with this thing that maybe wasn't like a quintessential top 5 product usage group. We've got some great engineering minds and some great data minds, and so I think we should have just made our own conclusions there. Like, what are the use cases for product viz? What are we trying to achieve? What's the path of least effort or least resistance? What's a quick win here? Like, what's an MVP, et cetera? So that's now firmly in your court, K-Lou, and I'm feeling extraordinarily more
Yep.
confident. But I'm not sure if
What?
limited product usage viz does it justice. It's like it's been a choppy road, basically.
Yeah. It was almost like non-existent, and now we have like everything at our fingertips just to run some queries, poke it in the data box. It's like, okay, we can do something with this now. It's a much better place we're heading into.
Totally. Totally. So opportunities, we've got 400 users on legacy pricing that are basically paying what they paid when they signed up, regardless of how their stuff has changed. If they should have been moved to
Crazy.
a different pricing plan, it's just bananas. And I think that's another really interesting assumption, right? Like for me, or another kind of thing you should come to the table assuming, I guess they call that an assumption, but like a foundational assumption. Like for me, I was like, technical product oriented founders hit a plateau because they've got one growth channel and it's word of mouth, and even at that point they haven't been able to incentivize it correctly or wrap kind of structure around it and get as much squeeze as they can. So there's probably optimization there,
Hmm.
but pricing is so hard. It's such a niche skill. There's lots of ways to go about it, and so I think no matter what, in any setting, pricing is a lever you should pull, but it might be the biggest, best lever you ever pull. And that could be like truly what an entire thesis is built around. So anyway, we have 400 users that are paying the wrong price. I can tell you that. Let's move on. We have a marquee ambassador. Like I'm talking like we've got our Mike Jordan, dude. Like
Yeah,
straight
yeah.
up. And it's incredible. And he's the man and he loves the product. He loves his industry. He loves his craft. He loves collaborating with us. Just a superstar. And I think you can build a brand around that.
Yep.
So I'm super jazzed. And then we've got 14x ambassadors. Still, that's kind of a vanity metric. We're here to, it's a vanity metric, but we got 14 of them. So if we're going to celebrate vanity, then shit, we'll have 14 veined trophies on the back wall.
You know what? We still have to count a lot of the work that went into this because even though it's a vanity metric, it's still 14 ambassadors that we can now use to light up with UGC and other incentives. And let's see who really, comes out at the lead as a leader of the pack. You have to start somewhere. So if you start with the vanity metric, now we can get into the real KPI that matters. Hey, we have a community we can utilize now, period.
So, and I think that also helps in kind of an SMB, B2B, SaaS environment. Before I buzzword everybody to death, it's like, hey, if you have 100% ambassadors, which in our case is 14, 4 of them signed up because they think it's cool, right? Like 24%, whatever's going to sign up because they think it's fun to participate in that stuff. The next 25% is going to sign up because they think they'll get featured in a blog post. And then
Yep.
the final 50% are going to really rip it up, right? Or I don't know, something, but you can bring some, base rates and some assumptions to that to understand how economically productive it'll be for the business. So right now it's still V1.
Yep.
All right, real quick, threats. You got a hard stop in 7 minutes, right, Kayla?
Yes, sir.
A little bit.
Hey,
All right,
still
we're
with
gonna
me?
keep buzzing here. Okay, so we got threats. We'll keep this super simple. We've got 205 lifer. It should say lifetime deal, people. But and it looks like we're gonna lose Kev, so I'm gonna keep on rolling. We're gonna pivot here to Dolo, KJ only. Hopefully this isn't infinitely more
This is
painful than
wild.
me rocking with Caleb.
Like, how does
But
that thing just get
all right, so here we
disabled
are.
like that?
Reverse engineering success. So or I'm sorry, let's wrap on the threats bit. So we've got 205 historic, or just to speak bluntly, the former owner did a, an AppSumo deal basically every year for a number of years, and that's accumulated to 205 lifers. We are in the process of figuring out how to navigate that. But in the interim, these are folks who are not contributing revenue and are contributing support burden. Not a great recipe. So we got to sort through that, and that's a threat kind of in the immediate term. All right, so we're going to go through reverse engineering success. And honestly, Kev, I know you got to jump in 7. Perhaps we just part ways here, and I'll rock through the rest of this dolo.
Okay, yeah, not a problem. I think my Airbnb Wi-Fi is also
Does that
crying
sound
uncle, so probably a good choice.
no
All right,
worries? Well,
well,
thank you for jumping on, my friend.
absolutely. It's always a pleasure rocking with you. Until the next time, for the love of the game,
Amen. Cheers, man. Safe trip home.
cheers.
All right, so we are back. Boom. Cool. So we've got reverse engineering success. So I think one of the big, now I don't want to say learning lessons. Like I think it was almost like just a reframe, like a shift in my mindset, like where, or perhaps it was something where a thing that I knew and appreciated well is now like fundamentally pushed inside my soul. And that is that like you must work with the physics around you. And so what, as an example here, and I'll get the quote. It's a Dalio. It's great. And there's a bunch of folks who have said this. I mean, one is like, that your job is to understand reality and then basically meld yourself to reality. The kind of vain or the misguided soul is the one that tries to bend reality to themselves, right? Reality is fixed. We're not. So one quick comment here too, you'll notice, or I guess just put simply, if you want a 3X or if you want a 2X of business in 3 years, it's pretty simple to be like, we need to grow this much revenue. Okay. So in our case, we need to take a 19K MRR thing and turn it to ideally 38K, but this is just kind of a working example and an exercise. Okay. So then let's think about the constraints, because one of the big learning lessons as well throughout this 6-week stretch is, yes, you can perhaps, or you can for sure accelerate the pace of internal execution, which is if you have lean teams that are highly productive individuals, you can move faster than bloated teams that are low productivity, take more effort to align. Perhaps they're unclear on tasks. Perhaps they're just, frankly, just not productive. Let's just put it that way. Small is lean, lean is mean, and you can go. But no matter what, you can't change the pace of the market, right? Like that is a constraint that you have to work with. And then you also have to think about, in the concept, well, how fast can you grow the business? It's like, well, I don't know, like let's shoot for 20% a month or whatever. And it's like, yeah, that's a completely arbitrary, made up, non-significant, insignificant number. Like it doesn't mean anything. You're just shooting from the hip, right? So you want to make sure that you're using base rates, which is, or it's like, hey, how fast should I be able to run a 40? It's like, well, that probably depends on how much you weigh, how tall you are, and how old you are. And let's look at base rates and see what other 35, 5'10", 165-pound dudes can do. So you want to think about, you want to try to introduce as many of those assumptions as you possibly can. So in our case, we know, and we've got good base rates around this, that for 0 to 25K MRR micro SaaS businesses, 3% growth is top quartile, and that's 3% month over month. So that means they're growing about 36% per year. So cool. So now let's think about reverse engineering success, right? And we did this exercise at the beginning. We just kind of had to fine tune it as a function of, again, hitting that 6-month mark. So figure we're going to achieve 3% and we're probably going to peak there at some case. Hopefully we'd like to get into, beyond top quartile into like 90th percentile, et cetera. That's where you start to see fun growth. And it's, we want to be playing in the 90th percentile of everything we do. That's where the fun is. But we can assume, all right, we're going to plateau at 3%. Our ability to get to elite or top quartile performance is, I think probably at best a linear endeavor where it's like we're going to get 5 units better every quarter and eventually we'll be elite. The way that learning typically works as a function of compounding learning is that it's usually where you get better much slower at the beginning And then all of these learnings start to compound against each other, just like in anything else, right? Compounding anything is, the eighth wonder of the world. And then boom, you see this big uptick in learning, and then the learning kind of plateaus, right? And so that's usually what like kind of growth curves for performance look like. But in our case, I just kind of kept it simple. So needless to say, we're going to peak at 3%. I said we'd peak, heading into the second quarter of the third year. And then we start to think about, okay, cool. So that gives us a month over month MRR growth rate. More importantly, that gives us a quarterly MRR growth target to look after. And now we can say, okay, here's where we want to be in 3 years. Cool. This is where we want to be in 2. This is where we want to be in 1. And then we can literally just track our progress and our pacing. And then obviously we can fine tune our assumptions and fine tune everything as we go to course correct as we go. So I think that's an important kind of point of departure, because a lot of times, the conversation will be like, yeah, we're going to double the business. And it's like, all right, are there 2x the users out there? Like maybe even start there, right? We've got 1,000 users, we're going to 2x it. Or 2xing a business with 100 users is very different than 2xing a business with 10,000 users, right? So you want to just think again, does reality, do the physics that surround us support what we think we can do here? Like, is it even possible? And you could argue that that's kind of a first principles approach. It's kind of, you got to be is this thing falsifiable? If it is, then you're at a first principle. So anyway, let's step in now. So that's kind of our general orientation. Now we're going to think North Star metric. For us, it's month over month MRR growth rate. So it's basically like we want to be pacing at the respective MRR growth rate as a function of A, measuring our rate of performance, and B, measuring our traction over time. Rate of improvement, and B, our traction over time. So for us, and I think it's interesting because North Star metric is such a telling thing. The most cliche one ever was Facebook, which was it's like 3 friends in 3 days or something. And so that was an adoption metric. And ideally, like, that's again kind of splitting the atom, because it's like we know, like, that means that we're acquiring users, obviously, and that means that we're probably growing ad dollars because we're growing users, and we basically are acquiring data that we can sell to advertisers and more eyeballs. So that's really splitting the atom, right? In our case, we're not there yet. You kind of have to mature your way towards splitting. You just kind of dig into the onion one layer at a time, and you earn each layer. But this is a very conscious decision because, again, I think we were myopic on user acquisition growth when there's a thought process around monetization and pricing that perhaps deserves even more energy than acquisition, especially out of the gate. So I think this is telling that it's MRR growth rate, because we want to be scrappy and we want to grow MRR. And that's what we're here to do. And obviously we want to do it in a sustained, healthy manner and in the interest of an enduring business. But we don't care so much about our target. New users, great. Conversion to paid, great. But we're here to grow MRR, and we got our mouth guards in. We're going to do what it takes. So year 3 plan, that'll be 2026. We want a 2x revenue. As I said, we inherited about a $230K trailing 12-month business. What does that mean? That means an exit at a 3x multiple of ARR. So now we're backing into what is a true objective, which is a return profile for our investors that is extraordinary as a function of MOIC and IRR relative to other private equity asset classes. Obviously, we're small potatoes, but we think if you stack up a lot of grand slam small potatoes, it starts to get really interesting. Year over year growth, that means 35%. Year over year growth as a number is going to be an addition of 10K MRR. And I'm sorry to the listeners, I'm just going to be throwing numbers at you. And then month over month MRR growth, again, we want to peak, if you will, at 3%. So that's where we're looking. And then we want to maintain elite churn, which is interesting because churn when you're talking about a peer group, here you enter kind of a new peer group, and churn actually is I guess, more competitive. And so here it's actually 1.7. You'll see we have more slack for churn when we're kind of at the upper end of 0 to 25K. When we punch into the lower end of 25 to 75K, churn gets a little bit more competitive, which is interesting. I think that probably speaks towards kind of growth spurts and what that does for user retention. But anywho, these are all very metrics driven, very kind of backing into evaluation oriented. I think the one thing that's qualitative that means a lot is a general manager or CEO. And that's steps into the ability of our camp to scale our operating model. And as we've spoken about, I think what's interesting about what we're trying to do is inverting the operating model. A conventional lower middle market private equity where you kind of, a buyout will occur, they inherit a team. They probably have a bench of executive folks that they're ready to install, but most of it is about operating partners that are SMEs, which means subject matter expert, that are external to the firm. Maybe they have some carry in the fund. Maybe they're paid as consultants. But the bottom line is you bring experts to tell the operators what to do, and then you let the operators do it, and you kind of hope that they execute well. And so your biggest point of leverage is the talent, right? Even as an operating partner, the biggest point of leverage is like this CRO is doing the job and executing, and I'm monitoring it, and I have a point of view on their performance, or they're not, and we need to swap in some new talent. Again, you hear me say talent about 10 times. It all boils down to talent. Our approach is let's take the operating partners, plug them in to transform the business, and then once we start to get to steady state, let's slot in what would then be kind of typical operators. So we've kind of inverted that approach, and we've transferred the onus from like advice to execution, and then slotting in folks when it's kind of steady state. And now you're at a position where, hey, we just want to kind of turn some knobs, pull some levers, and see what happens in terms of growth. But most of the transformation activities and the core execution is done. So anywho, the GM slotting them in will kind of be a validation point for that whole thought process. Y2 plan, this is 2025. Our target then is about 300K. And what does this look like? That's going to be about 20% year over year growth in revenue. That means we will have added 5K or more in MRR. That means we're at 1.18% is our average kind of month over month MRR growth. Churn is sub 2%, but we get a little more slack there, about 25 basis points. And now we've got, for sure, persona and ICB-based onboarding. I think it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, in theory, you want to pull that forward to year one. But I think in PLG, again, you can't outpace the market. You have to let the market operate, and you need to drive traffic through the funnel and give people I mean, if you just even think that like it's 2-week trials, right? There are only so many units of 2 weeks in a calendar year, right? So again, you can't outsmart or outpace the physics around you. But persona ICP based onboarding. And then we want our first like truly established channel, which would be product channel fit. I guess it kind of depends on what you subscribe to there. But and I subscribe to Power Law. So we want to find that product or that channel or that growth tactic, that motion that's going to yield 80% of our results. And we want that in place and absolutely, pardon my French, fucking buzzing. And then we'll play around and tinker to find the other 20% to round it out. But we're probably just going to yank that Power Law distribution channel as hard as we can and then sail into the sunset. Cool. So that brings us into what concludes after this quarter. So we're getting pretty close. 2024, baby. Let's go. So we want to be sitting at 265K in trailing 12-month revenue, which would be about a 12% improvement year over year. And that means we will have added about 3K in MRR to the books. That means we averaged 0.63% month over month MRR growth, and we maintained sub 1.5% churn. So far, so good, honestly. Like we've got a lot's relying on the pricing, as you'll see here in our Q4 23 OKRs. A lot's relying on really solid execution in Q4, which I like. I like when the stakes go up because for me, I think the focus goes up. And I don't know, I think it's more instinctual, more primal. I'm more present. I always like higher stakes. But I guess there's diminishing returns. You hate pressure to the extent that it distracts you or you crumble altogether. But so what does it look like? Stable support in an engineering function. I think we're very well there. Centralized visibility across business functions, metrics, and alerts. Again, we're there. And what's interesting is we did a turn on this. Sorry, quick distracted thought here. This is like a V2 on these Y1. Our Y1 was like not as accurate as I'd like it to be. It was way more funnel oriented, way more acquisition oriented. We didn't contemplate seller risk or seller transition and kind of key employee risk. We didn't like contemplate baseline capabilities and putting them here versus growth experiments and kind of getting to a place where the table stakes are ironed out. But anywho, a quick turn on this, but I'm feeling much more happy with it. So centralized visibility across functions. And what does that mean? That means metrics and alerts. So I want to know how things are performing, and I want all the alerts to hit me in one consolidated place. So I know how this thing is pumping at 4 a.m. when I stumble into the bathroom to take my contacts out or something. And then we want 2x ambassador user-generated content a month. And again, as Kay Lou had noted, I think this is an extraordinary thing that UGC, I think, is kind of splitting the atom when when it comes to ambassador programs. Like I think it's all about UGC under the assumption that leads are a function of exposure, and UGC is the way to create exposure. Product UI UX refresh designed and underway, and our first growth lever, which in our case, like big one, is going to be pricing and monetization executed. Giddy up. Hopefully everybody's still with me. I know I'm just rattling what is some dense content with a lot of numbers in there. This will definitely be easier for the viewers, but there you go. And shit, man, I would say if anybody has any questions or any thoughts about reverse engineering success, I think this is such a cool component. To me, it feels like you're playing a game and you're just kind of working your way back through a puzzle, and I like that a lot. So if anybody wants to ever talk shop about that, I am at your disposal. But let's get to the here and now. So heading into Q4, and again, now we're shifting towards quarterly OKRs. There will still be content sprints or something that is kind of more related to a sprint structure for content and for product releases. And these are a little bit rough. We mostly shaped these this morning as a team, and then courtesy of my OKR executive coach, which is a large language model. I need to come up with a name for it. It's like Billy, my executive coach. We did some massaging. So we'll knock these down one at a time. So let's start with just our objectives. So our 3 objectives for this quarter, and man, I think if my first mantra is like understand the physics and the reality around you, my second is that simplicity is mastery. And this is Occam's razor. I mean, there's so many principles around this that are ancient as shit, but it's, usually the simplest approach is the most accurate or most likely to be right. And that's usually because there are less variables to go wrong. But what is it? The Big Book of Mental Models does an exceptional, beautiful book as well. I've got it over here. The Great Mental Models, Farnham Street. This is volume 3, so it gets into systems and mathematics, but an absolutely beautiful book, and it goes over a lot of the 2 things that I just mentioned. So highly recommend if this topic is tickling you. But what are our objectives? Let's start there. So we want to do thoughtful, well-communicated release of new pricing model to better monetize our users, resulting in 15% MRR growth. Boom. We want to achieve an 85% or higher user approval rating for the release of new design system and brand settings, aka our first substantive product release. And then lastly, we want to test an alternative UGC tactic and compare against webinars to determine the next always-on channel. And so for us, I guess I'll just start there. I guess it's a little context there, a little voiceover. Webinars are tough, man. You got to rally 2 or 3 parties, coordinate calendars, agree on agendas, create landing pages, send, but the squeeze is worth a lot of juice, right? I think you get extraordinary insight from the market. You get a pillar piece of content that you can splinter up into a million different things, et cetera. But those are, and you got to use a framework, and we use RICE, as you all know by now, for just about everything. But, maybe it's like, hey, just interview a user, which would be like a spotlight, and you coordinate with one calendar. Maybe that's just a lower effort, equal impact approach. So we want to get more correct in how we think about that. So cool. So those are the objectives. Let's jump in. Key result wise. I think with the pricing approach, the main thing that where we're at right now, we generally have done a lot of the analysis and the research to get us here, so that you won't see those key results, but you want to, starting from the beginning, you want to look at distribution of usage across every feature that you've got. You want to ideally solve the middle, and there's the pricing roadmap book by Ulrich Lersov Schmidt is a beast. This has been a super helpful book for me. And then T2, D3, which you've all heard me talk a lot about. There's a chapter on pricing and monetization that's outstanding. Obviously, Reforge has some really good content around pricing and monetization as well. But so skipping past the analysis, which is where we're at, and I could write something on that if it's interesting to you. Just drop a link in the comments. But we want to determine user impact. So it's basically the percentage of users who are going to be moved to a new plan and what that dollar change looks like for them on an individual, average individual basis, and then on an aggregate. We want a break-even point, basically if we transition to new price plans, that looks great. What does churn need to look like where that looks like nothing happened, or, oh shit, it's net negative, which is the worst case scenario. And I guess headline is sensitivity analysis, right? We want to see pricing change, packaging, pricing. I think we just call it pricing design generally. But we basically want to run some scenarios and understand, like, if things go well, cool. If things go great, great. If things go god awful, what are we doing here? We're gonna box up the business. It's over. We want to execute a competitive audit, basically, because it's like, I think a lot of the strategy around pricing and monetization is meant for existing users and getting more kind of squeeze and value for the business for the value. And with software, hypothetically, you're providing increasing value over time as you solve for more use cases, refine your ability to solve the use cases. Software is kind of a Benjamin Button situation, right? It gets better as it gets older, hypothetically. There's obviously a lot of counters to that conversation, but we want to make sure, cool, in the context of our competitive landscape, is this going to totally kill our ability to acquire new users? Like, we basically can't be so short-sighted. We need to be thinking too, and we don't exist in a vacuum. We want to think about the new pricing plan in the context of the entire marketplace, and we want to think specifically, like, is this going to hurt our ability to acquire new users just purely from optics, et cetera? And then we can think about offers and how we get over that. But anyhow, we want eyes wide. And obviously, I think the success of a pricing model refresh is usually a function of the communication strategy. Honestly, I think more than anything, even if the pricing thought is just dog shit and it's just like misguided to the bone, it's like, yeah, but we told everyone about it over and over, and no one was surprised, and they were all just kind of cool with it. It's like, okay, cool. So we want to execute a multi-touch. And what does, I guess, a thoughtful communication strategy look like? It's multi-touch. Obviously, you got to tell people usually 4 times more than you think you need to. And multi-channel, right? You don't know where their attention is. So you want to make sure you cover all your bases there. We want to provide an FAQ document templates to support and navigate the related convos for our support camp. We want to obviously update our pricing pages everywhere they exist. And then we want to set up alerts, I guess, just beyond, like, once you roll it out, once the news is out, you want to just have your Batman sonar up, where as soon as it's like, oh, this sucks, I hate this company, you can jump in and kind of nip that stuff in the bud. Cool. So that is soup to nuts, our first and most important OKR. Number 2 is achieve an 85% or higher user approval rating for the release of new design system and brand settings. So these kind of simply break down into, like, user feedback and communication, testing and QA, a rollback plan, monitoring and issue resolution, training and support, and then, of course, kind of a user feedback and experience at the tail end. So I'll spare you reading through the wordier versions, but it's basically like, hey, we want to make sure everybody knows that what's coming. We want to test the shit out of it and do quality assurance to make sure that when it releases, nothing goes wrong. If something does go wrong, we need to be able to back it up. And for us to know any of this that's happening, we need to be totally dialed when it comes to monitoring for issues and having kind of like SWOT-oriented, high priority, like, oh shit, this is related to the new release. Let's resolve it right away, so we don't want people, to kind of lose faith in our ability to improve the product over time. And then, of course, you got to make sure that your camp is trained in how to support the users. And this is mostly about providing, like, best practice responses. So it's A, efficient, and B, on the rails. And then lastly, get some feedback. How do we do? Was this smooth? Did this suck? What can we do next time? And that's probably the most important thing you can do. Last but not least, and holy moly, I'm starting to lose my voice. Thank you for hanging with me, everybody. All right, we want to test an alternative UGC, which is user-generated content. You'll know that very well if you've been following for the last couple cuts. But UGC tactic, and compare it against webinars, which was basically, very quickly we understood that our growth is word of mouth. And that's, I think, an assumption that you can make, right, is that the channel that exists is word of mouth for these product technical-oriented founders. And so it was like, let's juice incentives with the ambassadors. And then as soon as we started talking to ambassadors, they were like, I want to do a webinar. I want to do guest blog posts, et cetera. So it kind of very naturally, very organically evolved into where we're at. But we didn't necessarily set it up as like a hypothesis. And so just kind of ran out a webinar. And that's on me. I think I was overexcited about the topic, and we wanted to jumpstart it. And I think the one thing that is a huge benefit to webinars is that there's an exponential effect where you have, let's just say each person has a network of 100 people. If I come to the party, I have 100 people. If someone else comes to the party, there's now 200 people represented. And yes, it might be easier to just have a party, me and one other person, but oh my God, when we get 4 people in the room, we've now kind of created with one interaction an exponential effect of from a network growth perspective. So I think webinar is probably a good place to start just because it's high leverage, but now we've got to coordinate 4 people. We got to make sure that they all bring their own food and drink, yada, yada. So we want to compare it against webinars to determine the next always on channel. So we need to execute the second webinar and see how that goes and just see like, hey, like, do these results spike? Are they building over time? And that's probably an assumption is that, we're going to get more traffic and more action from each webinar as we go. There's like a critical mass that's developing over time. We want to apply the RICE framework to select the optimal user-generated content tactic from multiple options. So this is about us shortlisting, what are we going to test the webinar thing against? And then we want to develop a clear hypothesis statement for this alternative UGC tactic, which is like, we are going to do this and we expect to see this, and this will be successful if we do see this. Something like that. Basic scientific method stuff. We all remember that from middle school. And then we want to execute this thing. And I said before December 15th, just so we have time for it to kind of measure surface area before the quarter wraps. And then at the tail end, we want to put them next to each other and say, hey, here are the metrics that matter for this next always on channel. Did the webinars rip harder, or did the next thing that we selected rip harder on like a RICE adjusted basis? So we want to look at everything through the guise of, there's reach and impact on one side, or there's reach, impact, and confidence. Yes, but we have to balance that with effort. And so what does that look like? So, ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap. Holy shit. So, scaling ventures for the love of the game. This has been a portfolio performance wrap. Just to recap, we touched on reflection and diagnosis, where we mainly just looked at the numbers. We looked at MRR and subscription bases over time. We looked at our kind of core performance metrics. We looked at our weekly scorecard. Then we shifted gears and looked forward in terms of some strategic planning. And we first just took stock. Like, let's conduct our own SWOT analysis. It's been 6 months behind the wheel of this puppy. What do we think? From there, we kind of fine-tune what it means to reverse engineer success, so calibrating our Y3, Y2, and Y1 plans. And in a conventional business setting, those are usually kind of, or if you subscribe to EOS or Traction as a business operating model, those things usually move, right? It's like Y1, Y3, 10-year vision, your kind of time is moving over as you kind of calibrate those things. So they're iterative in the sense that time is moving away. For us, they're fixed. This is where we want to be after 1 year. This is where we want to be after year 2. This is where we want after year 3. And yes, we need to keep a quarter of an eye on what would be a longer term horizon there strategically, so we don't get sideswiped. But it's much more kind of a fixed orientation. So what does it mean to reverse engineer success from that perspective? And then, okay, cool. Here's our 1 year plan. Great. What does that mean in terms of the next quarter? And that's where we landed with Q4 23 OKRs. Over and out. God bless SaaS. Have an outstanding weekend. I'll see you next time. Cheers.